They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
It is unnecessary to separate children from their families.
It's an invasion. It's not a caravan. I mean, we're beyond people saying it's a caravan. It's an actual invasion.
Immigrants are coming from arguably some of the most dangerous countries in this hemisphere.
Immigration is the fault and all of the problems that we're having.
Immigration. The movement of people across the United States southern border has become a prominent controversy of our time. Today, the United States is experiencing overwhelming numbers of people crossing at the southern border. As NBC reported, Border Patrol officers encountered more than 144,000 undocumented immigrants at the southwest border in May, the largest monthly total in 13 years. While immigration at the southern border has received greater attention in recent years, it is by no means a new topic of debate in the United States. In 2000, the Bush administration dealt with an immense immigration problem, with the U.S. Border Patrol report stating that over 1.6 million people were apprehended at the southern border in that year alone. The Republican president responded in 2007 with an immigration reform bill that would have allowed roughly 12 million illegal immigrants a path to legalization, but the bill did not pass. However, in 2019, the reemergence of mass immigration has overwhelmed border facilities and reignited the debate over our border policy. As of May 2019, 18,700 asylum seekers were waiting on the Mexico side of the southern border to enter the United States. Consequently, the New York Times reported in May the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security warned of dangerous overcrowding among adult migrants housed at the Border Processing Center in El Paso, with up to 900 migrants being held at a facility designed for 125. In some cases, cells designed for 35 people were holding 155 people. Furthermore, the amount of children who are unaccompanied or arrived in a family unit has posed a large burden on the federal government since 2015. The Flores Settlement, which was reached in 1997, requires that the federal government maintain basic living standards for children and dictates that children cannot be held past 20 days. In 2015, this was expanded to include children who arrived in a family unit. Due to the number of children arriving in the U.S., the current administration has struggled to uphold this settlement. Ultimately, there is no doubt that there is a crisis at the southern border, and the United States has tried to alleviate it through many policies. Between questionable ICE raids, family separation, deportation procedures, overcrowded border facilities, and President Trump's proposed border wall, the United States immigration policy is a multi-layered dilemma. However, the true controversy lies in what stance our country should take at the southern border. Should the United States deter immigration at the southern border in an effort to reduce the number of people allowed into the country, or should the United States welcome people fleeing political instability in Central America? Although there is support for arguments in favor of welcoming immigrants at the southern border, some remain firm in their belief to limit border crossings, both legal and illegal. While there are a number of concerns linked to immigration at the southern border, anti-immigration sentiments and nativist attitudes are a significant source of closed border policies, as immigrants are often wrongfully blamed for economic downturns, generalized as mass security risks, and deemed a threat to the United States' position as a world leader.
And they tend to overestimate the taxes. Tucker, low-skill immigration is inappropriate to our U.S. economy. We don't import buggy whips. We shouldn't be importing low-skill immigrants.
Selling out the American public. You're selling out, citizens. In a time where we're seeing how horrible some of these criminals can be, you want to open up the doors and the floodgates?
Maybe they really believe that every immigrant is a high school valedictorian or some world-class STEM talent who's only prevented from founding the next Apple or curing cancer by the bigotry of native-born Americans. Maybe they really think that.
The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee holding facility. Won't be.
Fueled by anti-immigration messages that are broadcast by major news outlets across the nation, the United States has attempted to deter border crossings in recent years, especially under the Trump administration with the zero-tolerance policy and the push for a new border wall. However, his efforts to secure the southern border have become a target for harsh criticism. On April 6, 2018, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the zero tolerance policy.
I have put in place a zero tolerance policy for illegal entry,
under which the United States would apprehend, detain, and criminally prosecute every person who crosses the border between legal ports of entry, even asylum seekers with their families and immigrants without a criminal record. The zero tolerance policy resulted in family separations. Under the new policy and federal laws preventing detaining families together, parents are treated as adults and their children are treated as independent, unaccompanied minors. As a result, when parents are apprehended at the border with their children, adults are detained and held in criminal detention centers while their children are placed in the custody of the Department of Health and Human Services and sent to separate shelters until they can be released to a sponsor. The Human Rights Watch reported that the Trump administration was considering separating families to deter them from entering the U.S. and tested a pilot for the new policy about a year before the implementation of zero tolerance. However, the effects of zero tolerance and the malconditions of short-term child detention facilities have generated public outrage across the nation. Reports of children being detained longer than the law-mandated 72 hours, confined to cages, using foil sheets to keep warm, wearing clothing caked with snot and tears, and not having adequate access to medicine and food led to protests across the country.
We saw many children who were 1 year old who were in detention. And kids go to school in detention, and their outdoor time and recreation is also within the confines of the jail.
The trauma of family separation has negative mental health effects, including instances of increased depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Moreover, the Department of Health and Human Services lost 1,500 children between October 2016 and December 2017 while in their custody. However, the zero tolerance policy was not Trump's only means to limit immigration. Currently, the process of seeking asylum in the United States is complicated and becoming more so under the Trump administration, as Professor Victor Romero and Professor Shobha Wadia, both law professors at Penn State, explain.
Asylum is one type of protection, and it's available to somebody who has suffered a type of harm called persecution or would face the same kind of persecution in the future because of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group.
So the Trump administration has made it much more difficult. First, they have this remain in Mexico policy. It used to be that you could present yourself in the United States and you would be detained, but you'd have an opportunity to have your case heard here in the United States. Under the Trump administration's policy, if you come through Mexico, you're supposed to remain in Mexico pending your hearing. And so hundreds of thousands of people are stuck in Mexico in what are essentially refugee camps. The second policy that the Trump administration, also being challenged in court, that they promulgated is this idea that if you come to anywhere other than a border and you apply for asylum, you don't qualify.
The United States has 47 official ports of entry along the southern border. Under Trump's policy, people seeking asylum in the United States must enter at these points for their applications to be considered. However, this policy is in violation of international law as it does not provide an opportunity for all those seeking refuge in the United States to be heard. The belief that the immigration at the border should be limited is not the majority opinion in the United States. Many believe that those coming from Central America are in fact refugees who were forced to flee their homes. As such, this position advocates, due to moral obligations, that policies must be enacted to make immigration at the southern border more accessible. According to the UN Agency for Refugees, a refugee is a person who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. The vast majority of people crossing at the southern border are examples of the UN description. They come to the United States because their countries experience high levels of violence, poverty, and corruption. Most notably, there has been an increase in asylum seekers from an area defined as the Northern Triangle, comprised of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. While homicide rates in the area have decreased overall, these countries continue to have the highest homicide rates for a country not at war. As such, many have attempted to seek asylum in the U.S., with the Congressional Research Service report finding that on average, About 265,000 people have left this area annually in recent years, and this number is on track to more than double in 2019. It is without a doubt in our minds that these people are fleeing horrible conditions. When we sat down with Professor Romero, we asked if the United States is obligated to help these people by any legal means. His response was immediate.
Yeah, if we didn't sign the treaty.
The treaty Professor Romero is talking about is the 1951 Refugee Convention. The United States, along with 144 other countries, ratified the treaty in an effort to set international standards for how refugees should be treated. The UNHCR describes the core principle of the document is non-refoulement, which asserts that a refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life and freedom. Currently, the United States is in violation of this international treaty due to the policies that are enforced along the southern border. The main violation being the Remain in Mexico policy. The argument thus becomes not only are we morally obligated to help refugees, we are legally obligated to under international law. While this policy is an example of direct violation, many other policies Trump and Obama administrations enacted could be viewed as not in violation. The argument that is made is that restrictive policies do not stop the United States from helping refugees. It just limits them.
But again, to me, it's difficult to make that argument if we assume that refugees and asylees don't voluntarily want to be here, that they're being forced to be here.
The debate over immigration does not solely ail the United States. Many countries in Europe right now are facing similar problems due to large numbers of refugees from the Middle East and Northern Africa. A solution has not been found over the past decades, and one may not be found now. However, ultimately, the people crossing the border are in desperate need of our help, and as human beings, we should do everything within our power to help them.